She didn't love you. She loved the role you played. Most men believe they're being loved for who they are, but the brutal truth is they're often just placeholders in someone else's fantasy. You think she sees you, but what she really sees is potential. An idea. A character she wrote in her own mind, cast perfectly for a part in the story she wants to live. It's not love, it's projection. And the more you fit her narrative, the more affection you receive. But the moment you deviate even slightly from that script, the warmth fades, the compliments stop, the energy shifts, and you're left confused, asking yourself, what changed? You didn't change. You simply stopped playing the role she imagined for you. This isn't an attack on women. It's a call to wake up. Because this isn't new. It's not a modern dating problem. It's an ancient dynamic that has existed for centuries, just wearing new makeup and smiling with new filters. And the tragedy is, men keep walking into it willingly. They want to be accepted so badly that they mold themselves to be who she wants. They become her fantasy. They perform. They adjust. And in doing so, they disappear. Machiavelli wouldn't have fallen for this illusion. He understood the power of self-definition. When you allow someone else to tell you who you are, when you let their hopes, dreams, and assumptions shape your identity, you've already surrendered the battle. A man who doesn't define himself becomes easy to manipulate, easy to discard, and worst of all, easy to forget. That's why most good guys get left behind. Not because they weren't enough, but because they were never truly seen. They were just projections on a blank screen. You need to understand the beginning of most relationships is a mirage. She's not loving you. She's loving what you represent in her mind. It's why everything feels perfect at first, because the illusion hasn't cracked yet. You mistake fantasy for connection, chemistry for clarity. But while you're busy falling in love, she's busy filling in the blanks. And the moment you step out of character, when you reveal a side of yourself that doesn't match her expectations, you become a disappointment, not because you failed her, but because you exposed the truth. You were never that man to begin with. Real power comes from resisting the temptation to be flattered into submission. It comes from slowing down when she puts you on a pedestal, from grounding yourself when her admiration feels too quick, too intense. A strong man doesn't chase admiration. He studies it. He questions it. He asks, does she see me, or does she see who she wants me to be? Because here's the reality. The man who allows himself to be fantasized will eventually be punished for not living up to it. But the man who calmly refuses to be anyone but himself, he becomes unforgettable. Not because he tried to be loved, but because he refused to be anything other than real. One of the greatest traps a man can fall into is thinking he's in control while silently surrendering to a role he never consciously agreed to play. It doesn't start with chains. It starts with compliments. She admires how dependable you are, how supportive, how calm in crisis. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to lean into those traits more. Not because they're who you are at your core, but because they're what she responds to. You shift, you adjust, you shrink yourself to better fit the mold, and by the time you realize it, you've traded your freedom for validation. This isn't always malicious on her part. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes even sweet. But it's still dangerous, because the more you become the person she expects, the less you remain the man you are. And every time you suppress your own instincts to play a part in someone else's story, you chip away at your own identity. It's a quiet betrayal, not of her, but of yourself. Over time, you're no longer responding from truth, you're reacting from pressure. Her moods become your responsibility. Her expectations become your commandments, and soon your own wants, needs, and boundaries are nothing more than background noise. You wake up one day realizing you're not living, you're managing. Managing her emotions, managing her needs, managing your performance just to keep the peace. Machiavelli would have called this voluntary servitude the most insidious kind of slavery, not imposed by force, but by subtle conditioning. And it's voluntary because at some level you agreed to it. You wanted to be the man she praised. You wanted to keep her happy. But in doing so, you gave her the script and let her direct your life. The antidote: clarity, self-possession, and the courage to challenge assumptions early. Before you fall into a role, ask the questions most men are too afraid to ask. What exactly do you expect from me? What role are you hoping I'll play in your life? And most importantly, what happens if I don't fit that role? Her answer or her avoidance of it will tell you everything you need to know. If she's vague, if she dodges, if she gets defensive, that's not a sign of love. It's a sign of a script she's trying to protect. Because people who are truly connected to you, not your image, don't fear your truth. They welcome it. But people who are addicted to their fantasy, they'll do anything to keep you performing. A man who defines his role before it's defined for him is a man who can never be controlled. He doesn't live to be chosen. He chooses. He doesn't perform. He leads. And that kind of man becomes untouchable, not because he's cold or distant, but because he refuses to disappear behind a mask. In a world full of actors, he's one of the few who dares to be real, and that is the rarest power of all. There's a trap that almost every man walks into, not out of weakness, but out of love, loyalty, and a desire to protect. You see her struggling. She's anxious, overwhelmed, spiraling. And something inside you kicks in the instinct to help to hold her together, to make her feel safe. You become her anchor, her emotional support system, the person who always answers the call. It feels noble, masculine, purposeful. But over time, what you don't realize is this: the more you carry her weight, the more you lose your own center. It starts small. She vents, you listen. She cries, you comfort. She panics, you calm her down. You're always there, always available, always stepping in to fix, solve, protect. And for a while it feels like connection, like love, but slowly it shifts. It goes from appreciation to expectation, from gratitude to entitlement. And now you're not the man she admires. You're the man she leans on, not because she respects your strength, but because she needs your energy to hold herself together. And that's the danger. Because what you thought was love is actually emotional dependency, a leash disguised as intimacy. She doesn't see your time as a gift anymore. She sees it as her right. And every time you drop everything for her, every time you absorb her stress, every time you sacrifice your peace to stabilize her storm, you're teaching her something dangerous: that your boundaries don't matter, that your world revolves around hers, that your identity is negotiable as long as she's okay. Machiavelli warned about this kind of servitude. He understood that when a man gives too much of himself, he becomes easy to rule, not by force, but by expectation. And the longer you live in that dynamic, the harder it becomes to say no. You start to feel guilty for protecting your time. You feel selfish for needing space. You begin to question whether you even have the right to put yourself first anymore. But here's the truth, and it's a hard one. The man who cannot say no, even gently, will never be respected. He will only be used. Not because the woman is cruel, but because the structure of the relationship rewards dependence, not balance. The way out: you don't need to be cruel, you just need to be clear. Start small. Say no to the non-essentials. Refuse the guilt trips. Step away from the endless emotional emergencies that aren't yours to fix. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with quiet authority. Each time you do, you reclaim your peace. You remind her and yourself that your value isn't in how much you can absorb. It's in how solid you remain, even when chaos knocks. Because in the end, the man who is not owned by anyone's emotions becomes the one who commands respect from everyone. He is calm, he is steady, and most importantly, he is free. One of the most dangerous things a man can do in a relationship is silently accept a role he never consciously chose. It doesn't always come with a direct request. It rarely sounds like, "I want you to be this kind of man." Instead, it creeps in slowly through unspoken expectations, through subtle praise when you act a certain way, through her silence, when you express a part of yourself that doesn't match the image she prefers. And before you realize it, You're no longer acting from your core. You're performing. You become the dependable one, the fixer, the emotionally stable rock, the man who doesn't complain, doesn't push back, doesn't need space. You become everything she wants, and in the process, you bury everything you are. You stop saying what you feel. You hesitate to express disagreement. You choose peace over honesty, approval over alignment. And maybe it feels like love in the beginning. Maybe it even feels noble, but it's not love. If it costs you your truth, it's not noble if it costs you your self-respect. Over time, this quiet compromise turns toxic. You begin to feel suffocated by your own silence. You start to forget where the performance ends and the real you begins. And here's the hardest part: when the relationship starts to feel strained, you blame yourself. You think you're not doing enough. You double down on the performance. You try harder to be who she wants, but no matter how much you give, it's never quite enough. Why? Because people don't fall in love with actors. They fall in love with presence. And when a man is no longer present in himself, when he's living as a role, not as a person, he becomes hollow. Machiavelli would call this the loss of sovereignty, the surrender of personal power in exchange for perceived harmony. And it's always a bad trade, because the longer you stay in a role you didn't define, the more resentment grows. Not just toward her, but toward yourself. You know deep down that something is off, that the man she thinks she loves isn't fully you. And unless you reclaim your identity, you'll keep drifting further from the truth. So how do you take it back? You start by asking sharper questions, not to her, but to yourself. What role am I playing right now? Did I choose this, or did I slide into it because it was easier than facing rejection? What would I say or do differently if I wasn't afraid of losing approval? These questions cut deep, but they also cut through illusion. The truth is, a man who defines his own role, who decides what kind of presence he will bring into a relationship, can never be manipulated into a version of himself that isn't real. He becomes powerful, not because he dominates, but because he refuses to disappear. In a world that constantly pushes men to adapt, to adjust, to perform, there is nothing more magnetic than a man who stands firmly in who he is. No apologies, no act, no mask, just presence. And presence in its purest form is power. There's a fatal mistake countless men make in relationships, and it almost always comes from a good place. They try to be agreeable, accommodating, easy to love. They think, if I show her I'm understanding, if I never push too hard, if I stay flexible and avoid conflict, she'll stay. But what begins as kindness quickly becomes self-erasure, and what's worse, she doesn't thank you for it. She loses interest. Not because you weren't nice enough, but because in trying to please her, you stopped being a man she could respect. You see, attraction isn't built on compliance, it's built on presence, certainty, a sense of self that doesn't flinch under pressure. Every time you bend your opinions to fit hers, every time you hide your disagreement to keep the peace, every time you say yes, when you mean no, you lose a layer of your identity. Slowly, quietly, you become less of a man and more of a mirror, reflecting what she wants to see, rather than standing in your own truth. And here's the paradox. The more you try to make her happy by changing yourself, the more she feels the weight of leadership fall on her. She stops feeling feminine. She starts feeling like she's in control, and desire fades. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler who seeks to please everyone ends up pleasing no one, and that principle applies to love just as much as power. When you seek to avoid rejection at all costs, you trade authority for comfort. But comfort isn't what keeps passion alive. Politeness isn't what draws a woman in. It's strength. It's the rare courage to disagree without aggression, to remain calm while holding your ground, to speak your truth even when it might cause friction. And it doesn't take a dramatic confrontation to reclaim that energy. Sometimes it's as simple as answering honestly when she tests you, when she throws a provocative question your way. Would you still love me if I gained 50 pounds? Or, do you think I'm too emotional sometimes? Don't dodge. Don't lie to keep her pleased. Give her your truth, delivered with steadiness, not shame. Say, "That's not how I see it," or "I think differently, but I respect your view." Those small moments of clarity send a powerful signal. I'm not here to perform, I'm here to be real. The truth is, women don't want to lead emotionally. They want to feel your groundedness, your clarity, your unshakable presence. That's what creates safety. That's what creates polarity. And that's what keeps you attractive. Not for a moment, but over time. A man who doesn't flinch under pressure, who doesn't apologize for having a spine, who remains kind without losing his edges, that man becomes irresistible. Not because he's trying to be, but because he's fully himself. And in a world of men who are too afraid to take up space, his calm strength stands out like a flame in the dark. That's how you stop trying to be loved and start being desired. Most men are raised to be agreeable, to be polite, to be the guy who listens, who smiles, who doesn't cause conflict. Society tells them, if you're kind, you'll be loved. If you're respectful, you'll be chosen. So they become the nice guy, always available, always agreeable, always putting others first. But what no one tells them is that in trying to be loved by everyone, they become respected by no one, because beneath the surface of that nice behavior often lies something far more dangerous. Fear of rejection, fear of disappointing her, fear of being alone. And so the nice guy suppresses his truth. He agrees when he disagrees. He laughs when he's uncomfortable. He nods to keep the peace, even when the peace costs him his voice. And over time, he loses the very thing that makes a man attractive: his presence, his edge, his identity. He becomes a mask, constantly shape-shifting to meet expectations but never standing firm in who he really is. This isn't kindness, it's survival, and it's exhausting. Machiavelli warned us centuries ago, a prince who tries to please everyone will ultimately be ruled by those he aims to satisfy. In modern terms, a man who hides his truth to avoid conflict doesn't keep the peace. He becomes a prisoner inside his own silence. Because when your value depends on external approval, you're always one disagreement away from being discarded. The way out isn't aggression. It's not becoming cold or cruel. It's something far more courageous. Self-confrontation, sitting with your own discomfort, asking yourself, who am I when no one is clapping? What do I believe when no one's watching? What parts of myself have I buried just to be accepted? These are not easy questions, but they are the ones that separate men who lead from men who perform. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to be liked, people start paying attention. The moment you stop hiding behind politeness and start living from truth, something shifts. You walk differently, speak differently. You become the kind of man who commands respect without raising his voice. Not because he's intimidating, but because he's real. It starts with one choice, one boundary, one moment of honesty when you'd usually stay quiet. You don't have to change everything overnight. You just have to stop betraying yourself in the name of being easy to love. Because the truth is, the man who is not afraid to walk away is the one no one wants to lose. The man who does not need applause is the one people are drawn to. Not out of obligation, but out of awe. That's the man she respects. The man she can't control. Not because he fights for dominance, but because he owns his space. Because he knows who he is, even in silence and in a world full of men performing for validation. That kind of authenticity isn't just powerful, it's rare. And what is rare is always desired. There comes a moment in every man's life where he must ask a brutal, uncomfortable question. Who am I when no one is watching? Not the version you show to win love, not the one crafted to gain approval, but the raw, unfiltered truth of you, without applause, without validation, without a script. Most men never ask that question. They're too busy performing, too busy chasing attention, fitting in, staying agreeable, molding themselves to be liked, chosen, accepted. And in that chase, they lose the very thing they were born to protect: their sovereignty. Sovereignty isn't about power over others. It's not about being feared or dominant. It's the quiet, unwavering authority a man holds when he no longer needs to perform, when he no longer bends for every passing mood, every shifting standard, every external opinion. It's the stillness inside that says, I know who I am, I choose who enters my world, and I refuse to trade my peace for validation. Most men don't lose their strength in one blow. They give it away slowly, one compromise at a time. They bite their tongue to keep the conversation smooth. They say yes when they want to say no. They shrink their dreams, soften their edges, numb their convictions, all to avoid rocking the boat. But a man who lives to be liked will always be ruled by the people he's trying to please. And over time, he becomes a leaf in the wind, blown around by emotions, opinions, trends, and approval. He exists, but he no longer decides. Machiavelli warned us a ruler who depends on the love of his subjects becomes a slave to their whims. And in today's world, the subjects are everywhere on social media, in relationships, in the workplace, in friend groups. If your identity hinges on being praised, you will always feel unstable, because praise fades. Applause dies, and love built on performance disappears the moment you stop performing. But something powerful happens when you stop needing to be understood. When you stop explaining, stop chasing, stop trying to prove your worth. You start embodying it. You become a presence that others feel. Not because you're loud, but because you're solid. People notice your stillness. They sense your clarity. They can't manipulate what they can't shake. This is sovereignty, and it begins in solitude, in silence. In the moments you choose self-respect over attention, standards over desperation, peace over performance. It's the decision to be the tree, not the leaf, to stand tall, rooted, unshakable. And in doing so, you stop attracting noise and start attracting respect. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will stay, but the ones who do. They'll follow your lead, not because you begged, but because you became undeniable. You weren't born to be chosen. You were born to choose. You weren't made to chase crowds. You were made to walk your own path and let those aligned with your truth rise to meet you. That is the quiet revolution of the sovereign man. And once you step into that identity, the world doesn't own you anymore. You own yourself. And there is no power greater than that. In a world where everyone is performing on social media and dating, even in friendships, the most powerful thing you can do is stop performing and start living from truth. The core message is simple but often forgotten. When you rely on others to define your worth, you'll always be at their mercy. Whether it's trying to be the perfect boyfriend, the emotional support system, or the nice guy who avoids conflict, every time you change who you are to be accepted, you lose a piece of yourself. That loss isn't always loud, it's slow, quiet, invisible, but over time it hollows you out. Real strength comes from self-definition, from knowing who you are when there's no applause, no audience, no approval. It's about building inner stability so strong, no mood, demand, or rejection can shake you. That doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. It means setting boundaries with calm, saying no without guilt, and leading your life without permission. Machiavelli taught that those who seek to be loved above all else are easily ruled. But those who seek clarity, who choose standards, solitude, and sovereignty, become respected and eventually unforgettable. So, here's the application. Take 1 hour this week. No phone, no distractions, just you and your thoughts. Ask yourself, who am I when I'm not performing? What values actually matter to me? What would I do differently if I wasn't afraid of losing approval? Then act from that place, one decision at a time. Because when you stop needing to be chosen, you start becoming the one who chooses. That's where true power begins. Not in what you gain from others, but in what you refuse to give away your identity.